Hello, everyone. Craig Wessels here from A Yank on the Footy, and we are back with our second episode in our series of most interesting guests. And I have gone through my list of the 400 plus episodes that I have done, and I've pulled out my 13 most interesting guests that I have had on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of these with you. Last week, I brought my first guest. That was Damien Buttigieg, who is a huge Melbourne Demon supporter. And in this episode, we're going to go all the way back to one of the earliest episodes of the podcast, episode number 16, for my first foray into a discussion with Terry Dehghani from the Blue Abroad podcast and the Blue Abroad Media Group. And Terry is just a phenomenal man. I have had the pleasure of having him on the podcast 5 times, and will probably be a 6th time as we preview Carlton in February or March. And I really enjoyed talking with him. But this was my initial chat with him back in, I believe, April of 2020. And it was a phenomenal discussion, because if you look at where Blue Abroad is now, and you see even where it was just a few years ago, it's amazing the progress that group has made, because they're everywhere now. They do a phenomenal job promoting their club with their podcasts, with their videos that they put online, and the production value for it is top notch. And I have to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever told Terry this previously, but I think Terry could also find a career reading audiobooks if he chose to do so. And I don't even think that he would be boring if he was to read the telephone directory or a telephone book to you as well. But let's go ahead and jump into my chat from April of 2020 with Terry Dehghani. We were just in the throes of COVID at this point in time. Yeah, I know how awful that was, especially those of you in Melbourne had a devil of a time with that. But let's go ahead and jump into my chat with Terry Dehghani. Today, my guest is what one might call a footy renaissance man. That's the term I'm going to use here. He seems to have done many of the things that one can do in the game of footy. And I would like to welcome Terry Dehghani, the founder of the Blue Abroad fan channel and the host of the Blue Abroad podcast, to the show. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you very much, mate. It is an absolute pleasure to be on the show.
I was glad that we were able to set this up. I've listened to some of your show as well. I'm not a Carlton fan, but I like to listen to how other people go about doing things, and you put out a quality product on your podcast, and it's I'm looking forward to listening to more of it.
Thank you so much. It's a bit of a shame, because I somehow stumbled across your Twitter page before you had started the first episode, and I remember having a conversation with you trying to get you on board, but it was too late. You had already chosen your team.
Yeah, I had actually chosen the team a couple of years ago. And I became, my favorite player is Nakaya Kakatu, and who knows if we'll ever actually see him play in a Geelong jumper again. Because he can't seem to stay healthy. Yeah. So you started the Blue Abroad podcast back in 2017. How did you decide to go about actually starting a podcast? What gave you the fire in your belly to do this?
Yeah, well, I guess the concept of having a Carlton podcast was always there. Not necessarily a podcast, but something where I was talking about Carlton and consuming Carlton content. I had moved overseas. I was living in China at the time, and then subsequently moved to Israel at the end of 2017. And, I didn't have any friends, didn't know anybody. And I'm a massive Carlton supporter, as you have come to know. And I remember listening to a Gary V podcast, and he was talking about the app Anchor, where you can record anything off your phone, upload it to Anchor. Anchor will then distribute it to the podcast platforms for free. And I said to myself, well, there it is. Bang. There's a light bulb moment. And the podcast really just began from there as audio. And then we, moved into video in 2018, and then, YouTube at the end of 2019. And, it's, I guess, with the current situation with self-isolation, it's a good time to have a digital sort of footprint and something to talk about in a platform.
Yeah, that's I'm actually using I use Podbean for this podcast, but I'm using Anchor for a podcast that I set up for my students at school, since we're not going to be back in school until at least May 1st, and I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that's even
wow.
going to be if that's going to be conceivable or not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
So you said you were living in China. Now,
Hmm.
if I read correctly, and from the information, and we'll get to where I got some of this information from a little later. You're an attorney by trade. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Am I,
So
okay.
my life's, yeah.
So how did you end up in China as an attorney, if I may ask?
So, I went through the normal path as the kid goes down here, and I guess throughout the world, pick one of the 25 or so careers that you're going to choose for the rest of your life and sort of go down that path. And my final year of high school, I decided that I wanted to study law. I loved it as a subject, and it's what I was interested in at the time. And that was a big deal for me and my family. None of my parents finished school, and so it was a big deal for someone to go to college or to university. And so did that, practiced for 3.5 years, and then it was probably at the end of year 3 that things changed within me. The world changed, the internet took over, the social media started taking over. I started seeing people creating a life for themselves just through the internet, talking about whatever interested them. And I, found that fascinating. And I hadn't done a lot of travel as well, so there was a little bit of an itch that was burning there. And I decided after year 3, my best friend was in China already teaching English at a school. And he basically said, "Hey, we need one more teacher. Are you interested?" He knew that I was sort of contemplating a change up in life and doing something different. So I took a punt and went and taught English for a semester in a small town called Yixing in the Jiangsu province. And that is how I came to be in China.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily dealing with your law degree at that point in time. Then, okay, because I was trying to wrap my head around. Okay, he went to China. I didn't know if you were working maybe at a consulate or something of that nature while you were there. So that was
Yeah.
where my mind was going at that point in time. So
Yeah, it was
you
just
taught
more for experience.
okay. What was your best experience when you were in China? What's the most memorable thing from your time there?
So I mean, it was funny because I hadn't traveled a lot, and then the magic of when you move away, all these random things happen while you're away, and I was obviously away for 6 months at that time, and I visited Shanghai for a bit, and I I got connected to a guy who was a director of an events company in Shanghai who were in charge of organizing the AFL China game. Now in 2017, that was the first year that they had played the game in China, and they basically needed someone to follow around Port Adelaide, who were I guess the initiators of that concept. And so I spent 2 weeks in Shanghai following around Port Adelaide, and that was really, I guess, from a career perspective, I've always wanted to work in sport. Didn't know what it looked like or what specifically, but that was really the foot in the door, so to speak. And so
Okay.
that 2 week period where I was just literally on the team bus with the players every day inside the football club, so to speak, even though they're overseas. That was, that's just something I cherish forever. And I go back every year to volunteer at that game.
Okay.
Obviously not this year.
Not this year, yeah.
Yeah, not this year, but yeah, that was probably one of the more memorable experiences. But, also I fell in love with the concept of mentoring and teaching and looking after young children and being responsible for them learning English and social skills. So yeah.
Terrific. I had no idea about the Shanghai game. I mean, that's very cool that you're able to be involved with that. And it's unfortunately it kind of makes sense as to, well, none of the games are scheduled at the moment, but kind of makes sense that one was put on hiatus for this year, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah, definitely.
Now getting back to your podcast for a minute, Who would you say is your, and because I have not looked through your entire list of shows, who would you say has been your biggest guest that you've had on your show so far?
Ooh, my biggest guest. Oh, so growing up, my first hero was Anthony Koutafidis. Now he was a Carlton legend, and he actually went to the same high school that I did. And yeah, he had been long retired when he ended up doing an episode with me. But yeah, it was so weird because I was clearly an adult when I spoke to him, and when you're a young kid, these sport heroes of yours are almost supernatural. And so
Mm-hmm.
to be able to then I was 26 or 27 at the time, to be able to talk to him, it was a normal conversation, but there was a little part of me where the inner fat kid, little small fat kid that was 4 or 5 years old, was just chuffed. So
You were
yeah,
just,
that
yeah,
was that was definitely
you were
that
giddy.
was definitely
Yeah.
my favorite guest. Oh,
Cool.
you have no idea.
I can imagine that's, yeah. I'm still working on getting somebody like that, and it's, I don't, I've put out a couple feelers, but I haven't heard anything back from people. Um, so who's your dream guest? Who are you hoping to get? Not somebody that, I don't, yeah, I'm not trying to put you on the spot and say, well, who's turned you down and said, heck no, I'm not coming on your podcast, but who would you love to get on there someday?
Um, it's interesting. I want to, in terms of a player, I want to speak to our captains. We have two, Sam Doherty and Patrick Cripps.
Mm-hmm.
But my dream guest, it's a fantastic question. I think the president or the CEO. I want to talk to them because, I want to bring what I'm trying to do is really bring a fan engagement layer to this with what I'm trying to do. And so to have the ability to talk to someone very top about our club who runs the club at an executive level, and obviously I play a role as well in the club in being a supporting paying member. I think that
Right,
would be a
right.
really good conversation.
I think it'd be a great conversation, and let's be honest, I think they might have some free time right now.
I know, right?
Yeah, so now would be a great time to reach out and say, Tuesday at 4 o'clock, you've got nothing going on, right? Okay, so
Well,
let's sit down and talk.
it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because a lot of the players now who don't generally, talk or react too much to people that are talking to them are very much open and willing to have a conversation. So it's obviously unprecedented times, but within that comes the opportunity.
Right. Well, I haven't run into any of those players yet. I've reached out to a couple. I've reached out to a couple of them. Yeah, I live about an hour away from Cleveland, Ohio, and
Right.
Matthew Dellavedova plays for the Cavaliers. I believe he's a Collingwood fan, and
He is, yes.
yeah, I'm not certainly not trying to put him on the spot at all, but I sent him a DM, and I I don't know if he reads his DMs. I'm sure if you're somebody who has lots of followers online, you probably just don't even look at that part of your Twitter feed. But I did send out a note to him, but would love to get him on to talk about basketball here in the States as well as the pies. But yeah, we'll see if that happens. But maybe I'll have to start being bold and maybe reach out to some people that I would think that there's no chance that they'd want to come on, and maybe I'll surprise myself. Who
I think
knows?
out of every 100 approaches, you might get two or three or four yeses, and it's those yeses that are the quality there, I think.
That's terrific. That's a great point. That's a great point. So you said um your biggest get was Anthony Koutafidis, and you remember you were
Hmm.
watching him when you were a little kid. So what is your
Yeah.
earliest what's your earliest memory of footy? What's the thing that you look back on, 25 years ago and go, oh yeah, that was great.
So my first memory of footy is really the reason why I became a Carlton supporter. It was my first experience that I can recall of that joy and elation and excitement. Our great game is predicated on an energy in the atmosphere that is just something I haven't seen in too many other sports, just because of the nature of how it's played. It's very gladiator type in the way that it's played. But I remember So Carlton's home ground, historic home ground, is at Princess Park. It used to be called Optus Oval. And I remember going to a game there. I would have been no older than 5 years old. I don't remember the actual optics of the game and the score, but I remember we played St Kilda, and I remember the roar of the crowd. And it was, I just remember, being immersed in this noise and energy, and it really just took off from there.
Well, that is something. I mean, that is a great. That's a great thing to be able to recall, because if you're 5 years old, if you're, depending on where you're sitting, you probably had a bit of a difficult time even seeing the field. Do you remember who took you to do you remember who took you to your first game?
Yeah, it was my mum. So
okay.
I went with my mum,
your mom took you.
Family friends.
Okay.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
My mum was a Carlton supporter.
Okay.
So yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, that's I think I remember the first professional game I went to was in 1969. That's
wow.
I was 6 at the time. It wasn't like I was an old man then, but yeah, it was and it was a game in San Diego, California, and my uncle actually had friends that lived in San Diego, and about 2 years later, I got a Christmas gift from him that had a poster that had hung in a bar right near the practice facility for the Chargers that the entire team had autographed. So I have this poster that the entire team from 1969 or 1970 has autographed. It's one of my most prized possessions. It's
I bet.
Yeah,
that's
very
really
cool. Unfortunately I don't have a den or a room to hang it up in, because we're in a relatively small house. Maybe when we retire and get the kids out of the house, that'll happen. So
yeah.
yeah. So that experience there is what led you to become a Carlton supporter. That crowd noise. Yep. and realizing, getting home and realizing they won the game. That was that's what led you to doing that. And no wavering on that. The trips to China with the game hasn't pushed you into Port Adelaide's direction at all?
Oh, look, it was far too late by the time
I know.
gone and spent some time with Port Adelaide.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I did a podcast with another guy who does a YouTube channel, and he actually said, like, a hypothetical question, and he said, if Carlton don't come out of this situation, which we know they will, but if they didn't, what would you do? And I said, well, I do have a soft spot for Port Adelaide now. And, I know them on a personal level now, the players, the admin staff and whatnot. And, when they're on TV, I'm watching with a different level of intent now. So I do have a soft spot for them, having said that.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah. And Carlton's going to come out of this. I hope everybody does. I mean, that was one of the things I talked about last week, looking at some of the news stories, that there's all this speculation about our teams going to merge. Are we going to have another, Fitzroy and Brisbane situation arise? Are these clubs going to, I've heard, people have been mentioning North and St Kilda and, sending teams to Tasmania. I hope everybody is able to just stay right where they are. I hope when we come out of this deal.
Look,
yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's the priority, the first priority, because we're only 10 years away from, or 8 years away from the recent inclusion of, the second last and then the last expansion team. They're still pretty new.
Right.
GWS have obviously been around for enough time now to make a grand final, but we just started growing the game to 18 teams. So I would hope that they will last.
Hang on 1 second there. Did they really make a grand final last year? I know there were some guys in their jumpers there. Was that really them though?
It was a bit of a fizzer, wasn't it? It was a tough grand final to watch.
Yeah, it was. And Richmond was just, they were a machine. And I before everything happened here, I picked, even though I didn't pick them at the top of the ladder, I picked them to win another premiership this year, because I just think they may not have the best players, but they sure play pretty well as a team. I mean, that's,
they've got a system in place.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. They've got role players, but
Yeah,
they've also got upper echelon superstars. So yeah, full respect to them.
yeah. It is it's a great, you have to respect, a team that plays that way. Even if you don't like them, you have to respect them, because, they're, yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, I'm one of those people, I feel fortunate in a way that, I came into watching the game so late that I don't have that deep seated hatred for another club. I'm told that being a Geelong fan, I'm supposed to hate Hawthorn. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But, I like watching Tom Mitchell play. I'm sorry. It's sure. Okay. When we play him, I want to win, but I want to see, I like watching good football regardless of who's playing. So, yeah.
Yeah, wait till there's like a fight in a game, or when some other player from a Hawthorn, for example, does something really untoward to a Geelong player, and then watch all that anger build up inside you. It's a great part of the game as well.
Well,
And it's sort of been stamped out as well, the fight, but it does bring out the hatred, which is part of the game.
yeah. Well, didn't Ben Stratton get suspended last year for what, pinching Fantasia all throughout that game? I mean, he came out looking like a pincushion, like somebody had been poking
He
him with
did,
needles that
and
whole game.
he did.
And it was,
No, he certainly did.
and I guess I had never actually noticed somebody doing that sort of thing before, but I'm sure that sort of thing happens if you can get in the opponent's head to mess with them and take them out of their element. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
and look, it's like I said, we see less and less of that these days. The way the game's going.
yeah, it's been, it's almost been regulated to where, you know, defenders are almost hamstrung, really limited in terms of what they can do. They've tried, they have been continually trying to open up the game for, to provide more offense. That's something I mentioned last week. It was an article that I read that David King had talked about, trying to do things to help open up the game, even more. And I said, be careful what you wish for, because the NFL did this here in the States to where, the defense is extraordinarily limited in what they can do. And, we have, countless penalties showing up on things that for decades of the game were never penalties. And it's really put the defense at a
Hmm.
disadvantage. And I that's why I said, we're going to get to a point where, the defenders are not allowed to jump. You can only have, 6 people inside the defensive arc. What are they going to do to try to, to limit this? And I think they're going to find themselves getting into trouble if they do something like that, they're going to get some unintended consequences from that. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's a big debate because the game. Many people want the game to stay as traditional as it is, and some would argue that it is a different game to what it was even 10, 20 years ago, which it probably is upon looking at it. But you also, and I'm also someone that believes in evolving and innovating, particularly with the trends of sport today, with people's attention spans are just not what they once were. And if you want to grow this game, this is a long, it's a war. It's a game of fruition and who can last the longest in some sense.
Right.
So
Right.
there is an element to that as well. And obviously we've cut the quarter short this year due to the circumstances, and now the talk is we're probably going to keep those shorter quarters. But then all of a sudden, you're right, we're talking about another change, and who knows what that'll bring.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen. If they shorten the quarters, are they going to try to make up so they, you end up with triple digit scores by, limiting what the defense can do? Who knows?
Well, yeah, I think in any sport, coaches will always find a way to find a defensive scheme, that will take over the game. That's the whole point of being a coach,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. That's like, if to carry this into other sports, what are we going to have? Are we going to have boxers that alternate rounds,
holding their hands, at their sides during the round. Okay, you beat the snot out of me this round, and I get to beat the snot out of you next round without you punching back at you.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to happen here? We need more offense. We need more punching. I don't know.
100%.
Yeah, I don't know.
100%.
I don't know that's maybe that's not the best analogy, but that's the one that just kind of popped into my head right there. And just
No, I like it.
I wanted to just mention one other thing with regards to podcasts before we move into some other things. And I've only been doing this since December. I'm very new to this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you run into any pitfalls or any problems with and I didn't realize that you had started your podcast actually when you were in Israel. I mean, that was a surprise to me, but looking at the timeline of some of the other stuff that I have on my list, it kind of makes sense. But have you run into any problems that you have had as a podcaster that you've thought, okay, how am I going to go about making this better or fixing this mistake that you've had?
Oh, plenty. I mean, you've got to have the mindset of knowing that what you put out is not going to be your best work, especially in those first few months, first few years, really. So, for example, when it was podcasts, we were, recording on Anchor. The audio would always be out of time. And then when I started doing video, actually, I've got a really good story. When I got back to Australia, and again, I didn't study media or journalism or anything like that, so it's all self-taught. But I bought a flashy DSLR camera, and the Carlton Footy Club were really good enough to let me interview some players. I did 3 of them last year, and the first one was really good interview, camera worked, audio worked fine. Then the second one, I interviewed a young fella named Tom Dehghani, who's our up-and-coming ruckman, highly rated up-and-coming ruckman, and the interview was fantastic. We touched on some really key themes and all of that. And what happened was, I don't know how I did it. I don't know what I did wrong, but I did something wrong. And I put the SD card into my laptop, and there was no sound. And the interview was basically, null and void. And look, it's a challenge because the club are not going to be giving me interviews every week. Right. And obviously, as a young channel trying to grow, you've got to take those opportunities. So what I did was, I turned I remember you could sort of hear the audio just not good enough. It was terrible quality. And so I turned the interview into a written article and posted it on LinkedIn. And then Tom was good enough to share it on his LinkedIn as well. And it got a little bit of traction there. So, there have been some pitfalls and whatnot, but the name of the game is adapt.
Right.
And, when something goes wrong, figure out a way to improve it. I mean, if you look at the YouTube channel, for example, if you go to the very first few videos, the thumbnails are disgraceful. And I haven't changed them, and I've done it on purpose. I've done it on purpose because it's good to look back and see the improvement.
To show that progression. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'm not really someone that gets too embarrassed by, putting myself out there. And I think it's an important lesson that you should be willing to put yourself out there and be willing to, take the criticism and take it on board and get better from it. So, there've been many situations where I've just made blunders.
Yeah, that episode I told you about it. I don't even know if that was at the beginning of the recording or if that was before we started recording here, where I had one that the audio was all out of sync, and I just said, I don't know how to fix this, so I'm just going to leave it that way. And here's what it is. And if you listen to it a couple times, you'll figure out which question went with which answer, and you'll probably be okay. So when you were growing up, did you play footy as a kid?
No, funnily enough. So when I was growing up, my mum didn't want me to play footy because it was too rough. So she put me into basketball because obviously you can play basketball, any season of the year and all of that. And so I played basketball for 20 years until I got to an age where, I was always a massive Carlton fan and a massive footy fan, but I developed a love for basketball as well. And so, once I was fortunate enough to win, titles. I played a lot of senior basketball and sort of won a lot early on. And so it got to a point where I said, well, I really want to have a crack at playing footy. And so I played for a club down here called the Thomastown Bears, and we won a premiership in my first year with them.
I was
can imagine the experience. What a debut year.
Well, I was gonna get to that because not only did you win a premiership that year, you kicked the game-winning goal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so it was the preliminary final the week before the grand final
against
it's a very
against
famous
Whittlesea
story
against Whittlesea, correct?
Correct. Against Whittlesea. That's very good research there.
I'll be honest. The person that I spoke to sent me a screenshot of the score, so I knew who it was against.
Oh, that's so good.
I did find the Bears website and was going through that yesterday, but a lot of it is under construction. And I went to their Facebook page, and nobody had been on their Facebook page in, I believe, 9 years. So I didn't think my prospects were very good at reaching out to anybody on there. So.
Yeah, no, it's very much a very localized club, but a great club nonetheless. And I've got some phenomenal memories.
Okay, so how long did you play with that group? Okay.
2 years. So that was the 2 years before I moved overseas. Okay. So yeah.
So you've actually only played then for 2 years overall? I mean, have you played since you've come back?
Well, 3 years overall. I should preface that by saying when I was 18, I played a season of footy for a club called St. Mary's while I was playing basketball, and it was just too much for me. So after that year, I stopped playing. But 3 seasons of footy, and then when I moved to Israel, I don't know if you count this as playing footy, but we did create a few teams there and had some little competitions there. But in terms of here in Australia and proper competition, 3 years.
Okay, so what led you to moving to Israel?
So 2 weeks before I was meant to come back from China, my girlfriend at the time we lived in Melbourne together, and I went to China and she stayed in Melbourne. She's a journalist and, obviously had some very important work to do. So it was just more of an experience for me. But 2 weeks before I was meant to come back, she said, "Hey, I just got a job offer in Tel Aviv. What do you think?" And I said, "Absolutely, let's go." I mean, my mindset at that time was I was completely, fresh and unlocked in a sense of what was possible. And I just said, let's go. If it doesn't work out, we'll just come home. We'll go get our jobs back and just come home and we'll be okay. And that was really the catalyst. Okay. Didn't know how it was going to work. I'm not Jewish. I don't have family who are Israelis. I don't have any connection to the land. And so it was really starting fresh, not knowing anyone. But yeah, that was really what led to me going there.
Right up until you said that you actually went along with your girlfriend who was a journalist to Israel. Right up until that point, this was starting to sound like the plot line from the TV series Jack Irish, where he's an attorney, his girlfriend's a journalist, she left and went overseas, he didn't go along. Well, you sounded that. I don't know if you've ever watched Jack Irish.
What's it called?
It's got Guy Pearce. It's an Australian show. Yeah,
okay,
I've watched it. I've watched it here,
okay.
But the premise behind it is he is an attorney and his girlfriend is a journalist who ends up moving to the Philippines actually, and then ultimately on to India as well. So, see, how long were you in? Yeah, it's actually a fun series.
I'm gonna get onto it. Sure.
I ran into it because it has one of the actors that was on the series from a number of years ago called City Homicide. Had one of the guys, he's an indigenous actor, a guy by the name of Aaron Peterson, who I liked him on City Homicide, and I found him on there, and thought I'll watch this one. And I guess Guy Pearce is a Geelong fan, so he'd be great to get on my show. So you were in Israel, and yeah,
he would be.
So did you end up working while you were there? Did you find a job there while you were? I know you were working with some clubs and establishing some footy clubs there, which we're going to get to in a second here. But you guys got established and things went well for you while you were there.
Yeah, look, I was. It took me 19 days to find work. I found, it was a fascinating story how it all happened. But I started working for a sports tech company called Hype Sports Innovation, where we basically ran accelerator programs for startups in the sports innovation space, and worked a lot with sport clubs from around the world. And really, it was very validating, because I'd obviously taken a big risk. And I mean, can you imagine day one of getting into Tel Aviv, not knowing anyone or anything, and then deciding, okay, I've got to go find work. Where do I go? So the journey, started from me just walking into the local district court to find an English desk, to someone overhearing me trying to find an English desk, to saying, hey, what are you doing? And me saying, I'm just looking for work. And then starting a conversation with him. And then he introduced me to a friend who introduced me to a friend. And the web sort of started, the networking web started from there. And then I ended up, on the 19th day, I found, I got the job offer. And look, it was, very, very interesting time for me, because it was very much, it was fight or flight. It was very instinctive. And, there was a time limit to how long I could last there without work before breaking down and having to come home. And so, it was, it all worked out for the good. And luckily enough, found a really good company, a startup, and we did some great things, and had 2 amazing years together. And, these are stories now that I have, that I'll cherish for the rest of my life.
And you, as you said, you're wanting to work in sports, so you've continued to network with that, even, now you're on 3 different continents doing that. That's amazing that you're able to do that. And so you're in Tel Aviv, you're trying to learn the lay of the land, you've got a job, and you notice that there's no, there's not any footy there, and there's not footy in a lot of places, although it's growing. So what led you to helping to establish? You established first the Cheetahs, correct? Was that the first club that came about?
Yeah,
okay.
That was the first team that we started.
Okay, so how did that come about?
So again, moving to Israel in Tel Aviv, I've got no friends. When I was in Shanghai, I had bumped into and found the Shanghai Tigers, which was an expat created footy club. And, I did a training session with them. And again, that just sort of opened my eyes to, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. The footy boys, footy culture, footy club, training on a Tuesday, that kind of thing. And so my first port of call when I got to Tel Aviv was, well, if I'm going to make friends, I've got to kick the footy around. I had my footy. And so there used to be a team. There was actually a peace project called the Jerusalem Peace Lions back in 2008, where some former AFL players came to Israel, and the idea was to have some Palestinians and some Israelis play and form a team, teach them how to play, as a peace project. And that sort of died a little bit once everyone moved out of Jerusalem and everyone was scattered around. And so there wasn't a lot of action. And so I connected with the Facebook page. They sort of said to me, hey, we haven't, we're not training at the moment. We haven't trained for a while, but, we might get back soon. And then it came a time where I said, all right, well, who wants to come for a kick? And there were 2 other people. And so, we went for a kick of the footy on a Monday. And I remember getting there and seeing for the first time the ball being kicked and just, buzzing at seeing it. And, 3 people became 4 the next week. 4 people became 7 the week after. And before we knew it, we had, the Aussie expats were getting around it. I was just like a kid in a candy store, because I was just excited. I was making friends.
Right.
I was kicking the footy around and, doing what I love to do. And it was really, footy is a part of our culture, especially in Melbourne. And and then we ended up growing to we had training sessions where we had 27, 28 people at the session. And it was like, what is going on? It just grew so quickly. And then, we decided to enter a team into the AFL Europe competition, the Euro Cup. And we also decided to start a team. And so we, brainstormed, and we had a guy by the name of Sheer, who was a local Israeli that had fell in love with footy and had played a little bit with that previous team. And he was the captain and the manager, and did a lot of great work. And then we brought another girl on board as well, who did a lot of the off-field admin, marketing stuff, and then there was just me who was, the coach and the ball of energy at training, which I think probably rubbed off on the others because they saw how energetic I was at training, and I think that's where we worked well together. And so, lo and behold, the Tel Aviv Cheetahs were born.
And I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you whether or not you were able to bring on board any Israeli players, or if it was just all expats. So it sounds like you had at least one or two then that joined up with you then.
Oh, we had probably half the group were locals. Because Israel is very much an outdoor culture,
right,
given the heat. And where we trained, it was, there's basketball courts next to us. There's, a lot of outdoor activities happening, and a lot of people walk past and sort of look at us and say, like, what is this? Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What is this game? And, it's so funny having the conversation and then trying to differentiate that it's not rugby.
Yeah, that's
it's Aussie rules.
Right,
and it's called football.
Yeah, it's been.
And so
it has been that with even here, and there are dozens of teams playing here in the United States, but I'll throw on a game on the television in my classroom before school starts, and I've actually had kids who come in now looking forward to watching the games, and they were all excited about the season starting this year. I had kids who were setting the DVRs on their television so they could record games to watch them, and well, lo and behold, the games are gone. So how did so the Cheetahs were established? How did the Dragons come about then?
Well, it was an interesting time. What had happened was we had a little bit of a drama. There was a bit of a power struggle. The beauty of Israel is that the collaborative environment, but also that the curse is there's a little bit of culture of, this is my stick. You can't play with it. And sort of between me and the other two sort of managers, if you want to call us, of the group, there was a bit of a rift. They felt like, what happened was we got national exposure in Australia. We had are you familiar with Nick?
Well, I was going to bring him up because I was going to say, that I said that, I had it on good authority that you had an AFL superstar that had, visited your club, offer some tips to the Cheetah team. Yeah. Nick Nat was there. Yep. Absolutely know who he is.
Yeah. So he came and, we had, some television exposure, and we had Channel 7 do a feature on us. And, obviously the hook for them was the Aussie who had gone to play footy and help build a team and whatnot. And that caused a bit of a rift. And it was probably, in hindsight, it was a good thing, because what it meant was, we had this situation where it said, okay, well, the Cheetahs are established. I'm going to separate from you guys. We're going to start another team. So the South Tel Aviv Dragons were born, and we ended up having a really good team there. And what that ended up meaning for footy in Israel was that we had a competition for the first time, particularly in Tel Aviv. We had two teams, and then we had a round robin competition where we invited other Aussies from anywhere in Israel to come and play and just form another team. And so look, it was obviously a difficult time, but I did get the feeling at the time that, it's more than just about me and my indiscretions and whatnot. This is about the game growing here. And I'm pleased to know that the South Tel Aviv Dragons are still up and running, and they train every Wednesday, and
terrific.
The Cheetahs train every Monday. And, that's the main thing there. And I did know that there was something happening that was bigger than me and the others, that were having a bit of a dispute. And sometimes
I found the article that I read, I found a quote that you had made that they had posted in the article, where you said, quote, "I've been really amazed at how receptive the guys are to my advice. Obviously, this is a foreign game, a foreign movement to them. Yet any instruction and guidance that I had to offer were always received very well, and that's something I'm very grateful for." So, you helped to set you really helped to set or plant the seed, if you will, to grow that game there. So, I mean, that's, and you had mentioned in our conversation off air that, that you were very pleased with what has gone on with the Dragons and how successful they've become. So it's it's great, so you basically helped to create two clubs there. And that's something that, you should take a lot of, a lot of pride in the fact that happened.
No, thank you. I mean, yeah, I mean, I do take pride in the role that I played. I think everyone has played a role in the situation. I think the most important thing as well. I mean, obviously, you have footy clubs and you have a social gathering, and a lot of the expats, the Aussies who have been born in Australia and grow up with our game and then move to Israel, they sometimes lose that identity of being Australian, and so for them it was sort of a reconnection with their Aussie side. Because a lot of them, they make Aliyah. It's a very honourable thing in the Jewish, community to go live in Israel and return to the motherland. And so, yeah, I do take a lot of pride in doing that and playing a part in that. And I've had so many conversations with people where it's like, mate, thank you so much. I didn't realize how much I love this game. And, but the bond and the connection of a footy club is just something that it's just, I've got goosebumps talking about it now. It's just, it can't be replaced.
Terrific.
It's so important.
That's great to hear. And it's, hopefully, people who are listening in the States to this, will hopefully that helps to instill in them that what they're doing here to grow the game here in the States as well is equally important, because, it's there are more and more teams every year that are popping up. And, I think there are almost 4 dozen teams around the country right now. I think there are 3 right now here in Ohio where I live, and there's a 4th that I believe is getting established. The closest one is an hour away, and I've not been up there yet to go see what I will not be going out and kicking the ball around. I'm a little old fat man. I'll go watch. Nope. Nobody wants me out there kicking it around unless they all have their cameras going on their phones, because it's going to end up being something that shows up on Twitter. So yeah. So yeah, I wanted to go back real quick to something that kind of tied back into your time with Thomaston, and I was told to ask you about your experiences on the Footy show, which I've heard that this is a really good story.
Yeah, so when I came back to Australia, the Footy show is an old Australian staple now, which is, unfortunately, it was axed. It was ended after 26 years of broadcast, and on the final episode, they had a grand final show, as they do every year before the AFL grand final. And my old footy club, the Thomastown Footy Club, the boys got in touch with me because they had entered into a quiz competition that was being run by the Footy show. And we have a big, I guess you call it a Ferris wheel, but it's an enclosed one where you can fit sort of 18 people into each pod as it goes around. And basically it was a quiz on the history of the Footy show, and there were about 10 of us there. We had to answer the questions within doing one rotation of this Ferris wheel, which took about 25 to 30 minutes. And there were 15 or 16 other local footy clubs who entered, and the winner, who obviously answered the most correct, who had the most correct answers, I should say, they won $20,000, which went towards the footy club. So we put our answers in. Yeah, so we put our answers in. We get around. Now we get around one rotation. We hand the paper back, and we've got to do another rotation. And then how the game was set up was, as you come back to the bottom, if your pod, it stops for about 10 seconds, if your door unlocks, it means you've won the $20,000. So we didn't know how many answers we got correct. We didn't know if we'd won. Once we had handed the papers back, we got our phones back, so we got to check some of the questions from memory, and we realized that we had a few that were wrong, but we thought we had a chance. And then you can imagine the elation when the doors opened and we've won $20,000 for the Footy club. And there's a really cool video clip of us all reacting. I might send it to you. So you can have a look at it.
I'll see if I can find that. And I'll put that. Yeah. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if I can find that. I'm just jotting that down real quick on my notepad here. On Footy show. Okay, I just want to make sure I touch on that real quickly. Now, I had a couple of other things that I wanted to ask you about here before we finish up, and this one is, it's one that, and I'll mention at the end here who helped me with some of this information, but I've heard that you have what some people call to be an unhealthy obsession with Mark Murphy and Chris Judd. Yeah, I mean, have there been restraining orders filed or anything like that?
Oh, mate, you have. Look, I can confirm. I can confirm it's an unhealthy obsession with both of them. Judd was obviously a West Coast champion who made the transition over to Carlton, and when he did that, that was massive for our club because it put us on the map. You know, we had the best player in the league, and Murph was, you know, the young kid who, when I was 14 or 15, he was drafted. And, you know, so for me, that's when my memory starts kicking in. And then all of a sudden there's this young gun midfielder. And then, you know, in 2011, he really broke out and had, you know, his breakout season and was voted as the AFL. He won the AFL's Coaches Association Award, which was a massive deal. You know, he was, you know, he was awarded with an All-Australian jacket as well. He made the team. And yeah, it was just sort of the validation because the team was up and coming and he was part of that rise. And so he's been my favorite player ever since. And yeah, I love them all, but the Judd and Murphy memories are just something else. It's pretty sickening.
You know, it's okay. It's okay to, to have a favorite or two. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And you know, it seems like, you know, in just the handful of years that I've been watching, there tends to be, you know, players tend to stay with clubs in, you know, a little bit more than say in some sports here in the United States where you know, players move with, I think, much greater frequency. So, you know, you get, you know, here in the States, you know, a lot of people talk about how they, you know, uniforms here, like in the NFL or in Major League Baseball, you know, it'll have the team name on the front and then it'll have the number and then the player's name on the back. And a lot of people here in the States will say, well, you know, I cheer for the name on the front of the uniform. Rather, you know, so I'll cheer for the, you know, the Cleveland Browns rather than a particular player on the Cleveland Browns. So, yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think it's a bit unique with our game as well compared to the NFL because obviously the helmets, you know, you can't identify too much who the player is while they're playing. Whereas we obviously, you know, we're very exposed. You see their faces, and I always found that interesting as a comparison to the NFL, and you know, it obviously affects their marketing. It doesn't affect their salaries because they earn a very good dollar, but
they do. Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, and we touched on this, and you mentioned it yesterday or last night or the night before when we were talking. How is the AFL Evolution 2?
Oh, mate.
Is it?
It's great. You know, we as a sport, we need a game. We need a video game to grow because that will be, and this is my opinion. I think for people internationally, if they can play this game and figure it out and say, hey, this is cool, that'll attract them to watch the game. Now, granted, the graphics are not fantastic. It doesn't compare to a Madden or a FIFA or an NBA 2K, but it's a good enough game. And I'm really enjoying, you know, obviously I've got a YouTube channel, so I'm enjoying, you know, creating content based on the game. It's allowed me to do that now because there's storylines that I can do now. We've got a series coming out where I'm taking one of our lesser known players who has just recently been drafted and bringing him up and developing him until we win a premiership at Carlton. So, yeah, you know, it's good fun.
I'm hoping to get it at some time, but I don't have an Xbox One. I have my son's old Xbox 360 that he left here when he headed off to college, and it died about 8 months ago. And yeah, I've got my youngest is still in college right now. My oldest, he's graduated. He's got a job now. He's an officer in the Navy, so he's off doing his thing. But my youngest is only in her first year of school. So if I could find a used Xbox One, maybe I might be able to persuade my wife to let me pick one of those up. Because I would really like to try to play this.
We can have.
Just yeah.
Oh, we can have many battles online.
Well, that's the thing. I've never, I never played. I've never been good enough to, and I don't play it often enough. I've never been online or played with the Xbox Live. I never did that sort of thing. My son would do it for hours on end. I would hear the discussions going on way too late into the night. But I would love to give it a shot, but it's it may be a bit of a pipe dream for me being able to actually pick up one of those consoles. I think right now. I think I might rather have a mixer to help my show sound just a little bit better. That may be the next thing I want to do before I invest in something else. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
so
cool.
I think we've covered everything that we had on the list here, and I did want to let people know after I'd been talking to Terry about setting up this interview, I reached out online, and I actually found his sister online, and I went to your Facebook page, and I reached out to her, and I sent her an instant message on Facebook, and I'm sure this, here's somebody on the other side of the planet that's reaching out to her, and I'm not sure if she's thinking that it's some kind of a scam or I'm some crazy person or something like that. But, I sent along, you and I had a rather lengthy discussion on DM on Twitter. So I took screenshots of those and sent those along. So she knew that I wasn't just making something up. And I said, we're going to be doing this interview. Is there any little tidbits of information that you could provide? So, I did want to give a big shout out of thanks to your sister for helping me with some of the questions that came along with this interview. I was so glad that you didn't just write me off as being some kind of a crazy person, and it was great to be able to discuss some of these other topics that I wouldn't have known about. But Terry, I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. I want to get back in and listen to some of your episodes. Oh, the one thing I was going to ask you before we go, what are your go-to podcasts? What are the ones that you like to listen to? Or in general, because I listen to a couple footy ones, but I listen to a lot of other ones as well.
Yeah, well, I'm a massive Bill Simmons fan. So anything the ring, and he's one of the inspirations for me in doing what I do as well. He's part of it, part of the canvas for me. But yeah, anything Bill Simmons does, anything the Ringer. I'm really enjoying Up in Smoke or All the Smoke with Stephen Jackson and Matt Barnes. I'm really enjoying listening to that at the moment because it's very raw and it's very real, and I enjoy that. I enjoy Zach Lowe. I enjoy Woj. Basically, all the podcasts I listen to are American and basketball centric. But yeah, I do listen a little bit to Gary V when I go in waves with Gary because he's always sort of giving me the same message, but sometimes I need to hear it. So yeah, I do enjoy
that's fantastic.
His energy.
I'm more into true crime stuff. Actually, it's kind of where my stuff. I have a couple true crime ones that I listen to. But terrific. Again, I want to thank you for coming on, ladies and gentlemen. My guest has been Terry Dehghani, the founder of the Blue Abroad fan channel and the host of the Blue Abroad podcast. And I want to thank you for coming on tonight for this episode.
All right. Terry, thanks so very much again, sir. I truly, truly appreciate all of the help that you have given me with the podcast over the years. You are a true gentleman, and you're passionate about your club. You're passionate about the work that you do with this organization that you are part of, and just looking at all the things that you have done to promote footy around the world is awesome. And I'm proud to call you a friend. I look forward to meeting you next footy season when I do make my pilgrimage, if you will. I'm going to call it that. My trip to Australia. Hope to maybe catch a Blues game with you while I am there. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the second of my series of most interesting guests. I do have a couple former players that are on the list. I have a couple of people who just had phenomenal stories to tell, and I cannot wait to bring those to you if you've not heard them already. Just absolutely wonderful people, and this is just a lot of fun, kind of reminiscing about what has taken place with the podcast over the years. We're going to be going into year number 7 here coming up in December, which I'm shocked by that, quite frankly. Of course, I can call the first year a year, even though I started it in December of 2019. So technically, that counts as a year. Here in the United States, you get a tax credit for your children up until the age of 18. So you get a full year's tax credit if your child is born on December 31st. So, this is kind of my tax deduction podcast, if you will. So, folks, I do hope you enjoy the show. I hope you'll share it with your friends and family and maybe explore other episodes of the podcast, especially the interviews if you haven't checked them out as of yet. And I'd love to hear from you. Okay, now I've not published the entire list of who's going to be on my list of 13, but I'd love to hear from you and maybe get some feedback from you and some predictions as to who you think should be on the list. And you might just be right. And you may actually convince me to go back and take a more serious look at a guest that possibly I overlooked. And and like I said, I went through every single episode, and I didn't listen to all of them, but I still have my faculties. It's not like I'm running for president of the United States. And on either side of the aisle, since that argument's being made on both sides there. But I may have missed somebody. And maybe you mentioned somebody as an episode that I forgot about or that I just glossed over too quickly. So I'd love to hear from you in terms of who you think the next person should be or who should be on the list. It may not be the next one. I kind of have my next one already mapped out. So I do hope you'll check out my website, ayankonthefooty.com. If you enjoy the show, I do hope you'll leave a review on the website or over at Apple Podcasts. It really does help. Subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I'm starting to get more and more of the episodes over there. And the best part, maybe not, of that is that there's also a lot of video with that, so you get to see my handsome face in that capacity. So check it out, ayankonthefooty.com. You can find me on X at Yank_on, a Yank on the Footy podcast over on Facebook. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. Look for my name, Craig Wessels, or a Yank on the Footy. ayankonthefooty at gmail.com if you want to shoot me an email. If you have an idea for a great guest, and maybe that's you, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out. We're in the midst of the trade period right now. That's wrapping up here in about 36 hours. There's a lot of deals that have to be getting made. I'll do a review of the trade period after it finishes. I just have not had the time to put anything together new and organic as far as the trade period as it's happening because, again, I don't have my finger on the pulse of that. But I do look forward to hearing from you. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. Cheers. And this has been the second of my most interesting guest episodes with Terry Dehghani. Until next time, everybody, bye-bye.